Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us this morning to the fourth, I believe, in our series of COVID-19 webinars for mainland Europe. My name's Will Alstein. I'm the Commercial Director at YouGov, and I'm joined this morning by our CEO of mainland Europe, Bianca Brun. Bianca, good morning.
Good morning, Will, and good morning to all of you, and thanks for joining us today. As Will said, my name is Bianca Brun, and I am responsible for YouGov's operations in mainland Europe, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some updates with you today on consumer data from our COVID and economy recovery tracker. So looking forward to that, Will.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bianca. Okay, so what are we going to cover over the next 45 minutes? We're going to start off, I'll just take you through a very brief overview of what YouGov is doing in relation to COVID-19 and our work. I'll talk also about our data sets that are both publicly available for free and our commercial data sets that we have. It is that commercial data set that Bianca is going to use and provide highlights from in the second part of this webinar, which is where the bulk of it is. We'll finish with where we're going in the future with our COVID trackers. And of course, there will be time for questions at the end. There is a chat function here on Zoom, and we'd be delighted to hear from you. We do have a couple of questions that we've had in advance, but very keen to hear questions from our audience today. So if you do have a question, please enter it in the chat at any point during this discussion. We'll either answer you directly in that chat, or Bianca and I will try and go through as many of those as we possibly can at the end. Just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, we will be sending across to you a copy of these charts, so please don't feel as though you have to write endless notes. And we are also recording this webinar, and a recording of it will be made available to you afterwards. Okay, so let's get on with the first element. What is YouGov doing in relation to COVID-19? Now, when our CEO first saw that this was turning into a global pandemic, he said that YouGov's mission is very, very clear, and that is to serve the public good. And what he meant by that was to be able to give everybody in the world who wants it a voice, an opportunity to contribute to the discussion and have their views heard. And the way we do that is through online surveys, through our new and innovative chat function that allows people to participate in the discussion around COVID-19. And what we're doing is aggregating that data and delivering it into the hands of organizations that can make a difference in the fight against the virus. And I'll talk about the three data sets that we have in relation to this. So there are three different types of data sets that we have produced. Our behavioral data, which is designed for public health organizations and policymakers. I'll go into a little bit more about this and each of them on the following slides. We've also got our public data, again, designed for everyone, distributed by YouGov and available on our website. And then there are our consumer trackers, designed specifically for clients, and we've taken great lengths to get your feedback into how those questions and data sets are created, and they're available on a subscription basis. So if we think about each of those, in terms of our behavioral data, so designed for policymakers and governments and has been created in association with Imperial College London. Imperial College is actually one of the world-leading centres of epidemiology, and it's one of the many university hospitals from around the world that is in the race to create a vaccine. And in conjunction with our advisors there, what we've done is create a global survey spanning 29 markets that really tries to understand the population. If you're in academic circles, it's called a CAP study, knowledge, attitude, and behaviour. And the way that that data has been created is to enable policymakers and health agencies and public health organizations to make better decisions about how they take the fight to the population. So we measure things like whether people have symptoms, whether people have taken tests, whether people are self-isolating, what they are doing outside of their home, whether they're wearing masks. But key and absolutely crucial to this data set is people's understanding and readiness to comply with government policy. Without that, a lot of governments would be flying blind and a lot of health organizations would be flying blind. But armed with that data, they can make much, much better decisions. We've also, for the first time in YouGov's history, made this data completely open source. It's available in two formats. It's available in raw data format or row-level data. That's available at GitHub, and there's a link to it in this presentation that was on the previous slide. So anybody can download that free of charge around the world. There's 29 markets covered in that study. Please do and go and play with it if you so desire. For those that don't want to play with flat data files, then there is the opportunity to use dashboards that are powered by Tableau. That is available through Imperial College London's COVID Data Hub. Again, a link to that is within this deck and on the previous slide. So please do go and investigate those. In terms of our public data, again, available to all, distributed via the YouGov website, and a link to it is on the screen there. Although I appreciate that that is a UK URL, data on there are from all 27 markets that we're tracking. There are interactive charts. You can drill into specific regions. You can drill into specific markets and compare and contrast as you like. Data within there span a range of topics, including people's fears and concerns, looking at government handling, and the impact on personal finances and job security. We've covered 27 markets with our public data, and responses, that figure is well over 500,000 surveys now, and pushing on towards 750,000. So a big, robust data set, again, available to all. If you're a subscriber to YouGov products, be that YouGov Profiles or YouGov Brand Index, then what we've done is upload a series of our COVID data points into those tools. For those of you not familiar with Brand Index, this is our continuous brand tracker that measures public perception of thousands of brands every single day. It's available in about 42 markets and has been tracking many brands for over a decade. It's used by brands and agencies to understand their brand health and assess campaign performance. So please do go, if you're a client, go and have a look at the new filters that are available in Brand Index there. For our profiles clients, again, we've uploaded data sets so that you can explore certain audiences in more depth in relation to COVID-19. For those of you not familiar with profiles, this is our audience understanding and segmentation tool. We've taken the YouGov panelists that we know the most things about and put them in a searchable, usable database that you can then turn, pivot, or roll to look through the lens of any particular audience of interest. So if you are a subscriber, then please do contact your local account team to better understand how the COVID data can be surfaced in those tools. If you're interested in either of those tools, then please do contact your local office or our general email address, info@yougov.com. On to our commercial data sets. So our consumer tracker was launched in the majority of the world on the 12th of March 2020. We actually started in mid-February in APAC when the disease first started taking hold there, but we increased the scope of our coverage as the pandemic spread. Now, data that Bianca will walk through today is drawn from our consumer monitor and our economic recovery data, which I'll go into a little more. But the consumer monitor covers three big areas. Levels of concern. So whether people perceive the global and national situation is getting better or worse, the impact that COVID-19 is having, understanding people's trust in government, as well as other areas, and also assessing government's handling of the virus. We look at changes in spend, looking at physical retail versus online retail. We've even got data in there on eating, cooking behaviors as well. And then crucially, media consumption. We look not only at channel, but also at content being consumed. Our economic recovery data was launched at the end of April, the beginning of May. And this was very much as a response to a number of our clients from a huge range of different sectors that said, what does the recovery look like? Is it going to be something that is very sharp, with a very quick recovery and back to normal? Or is it going to be a much more complex, slow, and difficult journey back to recovery? So our data enables us to take a view on that. We look at confidence and outlook. So we look at not only people's view of the global and local economies, but drill it down to the micro level. How has COVID-19 impacted their household financial situation, and how do they think it's going to change over the next 12 months? There's all sorts of other questions in there as well, including a nice but an indirect way of asking about people's financial situation. We ask how they would deal with a windfall. So if they received a sum of money, what would they do with it now? Would they spend it, save it, invest it, or do something different? A very nice way of teasing out in an indirect question, actually how people are feeling and responding. We cover employment levels. Not only at a personal level, people's concern about job security, but also looking at levels of activity of people's employers. And then the final bit is looking into the future. What are the changing consumer habits, and how do consumers think they are going to make a change to their behavior, be that in their work, be that in their shopping behavior, be that in their local community as a result of COVID-19. So I hope that gives you an overview of the types of data that we're collecting, the types of data that are available from YouGov. But I'm now going to hand over to Bianca, who's going to walk through the commercial data sets and pull out some of those insights and international benchmarks from across Europe. Bianca.
Thank you very much, Will. And the first slide, guys, is just a quick note on our methodology. So our COVID and recovery trackers run according to a classic tracker model where we collect data every week and have done that since the beginning of the COVID crisis. So we started March 12th, and the economic recovery monitor started tracking in the beginning of May. We're running 2,000 interviews per country per week in Germany and the US and the UK, and 1,000 interviews per week in the rest of the countries. So for today's call, we'll actually look at these 15 waves of data, and you can see the list of the waves and the dates to the right here. So it's on methodology, and let's dive into the data. So I wanted to start with sort of an overall scene setter to understand the perception of whether the global situation around COVID-19 is getting better, And for the purpose of an overall scene setter, we have sort of grouped the countries by continent, so Australia, Europe, North America, and Asia, and you will see also a global average here. Now, as you can see, we were across the board early June recording an increase in percentage of people who felt that the global situation around COVID was getting better. But this trend actually broke already sort of the second week of June, and we've recorded a further decline during this last wave, which is predominantly due to the situation in the US and South America, but it is indeed also due to the continuous reports regarding sort of sporadic outbreaks or hotspots in Europe, which I will come back to later in this presentation. But it is clear that across all regions that we do not yet have a stable upwards trend on percentage of people who think that the global situation is getting better. But let's look at the perception around the national situation related to COVID-19. So if you take a look at this next slide, we're really talking about the percentage of people who think that the COVID-19 situation is getting better in their country, as opposed to the previous slide talking about whether it's getting better globally. And as you can see, now we see clearly that Europe and Asia are much more positive about the situation. However, if we sort of dive a bit into the data, we basically see that the national progress in North America, for instance, is evaluated quite differently by countries. So the numbers in Canada are actually relatively high and very similar to Europe, whereas the numbers in Mexico are extremely low. The US is somewhere right in the middle of Canada and Mexico. Also, the numbers for Asia are very different country by country. So while national progress in China is evaluated very highly, the national progress in the Philippines, for instance, is ranked among the lowest of all countries. But from a European perspective, we do track further optimism compared to sort of early May. Even if we have seen higher scores late May than we are at right now. So I want to dive a bit further into Europe specifically and the perceptions in Europe around the situation and our trust levels in government. So really, what is important is that we remember the context, because we remain sort of at very different stages with different platforms, for lack of a better word, in Europe, meaning that every country has applied a different strategy to cope with COVID, and each market is therefore at a very different place in terms of reopening. So Sweden in particular, as you all know, has had a very different strategy to the rest of Europe, which has been noticed and also criticized by many. And the mood among the Swedes is changing and looks quite different to the rest of the neighboring countries in the Nordics. So we'll dive a bit further into that. Germany has so far managed the crisis very well and avoided high death tolls, but recent, again, sporadic outbreaks or hotspots are clearly worrying the German population, and particularly the recent outbreak in a slaughterhouse in northwestern Germany in Gütersloh near Bielefeld, where more than 1,000 people got affected. Italy, compared to Germany, has been severely impacted, of course, by COVID, but the situation has improved massively. But also in Italy, the context is sporadic outbreaks, the so-called hotspots, like the recent one that we saw in Mondragone in South Italy, where an apartment complex with Bulgarian seasonal farm workers were quarantined following the discovery of dozens of COVID-19 cases among the workers. The situation in France has also improved significantly, and we will see if it is also true for the mood amongst the French people, who have been quite harsh when judging their own countries and the government's ability to handle the crisis. So let's keep this relatively fragmented picture in mind as we go through the data. So this first slide here, we look at the positive sentiment towards our different governments' handling of the situation. And the two most noteworthy countries to look at here are Sweden. You have Sweden in the black line in the middle of the chart, and it's the UK, which is in the pink line. So for Sweden, we've seen a continuous drop in people who are positive about the government's handling of the situation. And Sweden is now actually a contested to France and the UK in terms of having the lowest scores. For the UK, we've captured a continuous sort of downward trend towards or throughout this track period, with a small uplift during the last couple of waves. I'd also like to highlight France here, and that is in the dark purple line, where we've seen a continuous upward trend since last, or sort of in late April, early May, in terms of percentage of people who are positive about the government's handling of the situation. However, as you can see, this last wave captured drop again, breaking the slightly positive trend that we've seen the last sort of 5-6 waves. And let's just take a look at the global picture again as it relates to satisfaction with the government's handling of the situation. And looking at our global benchmarks, you see how the European countries' perception of government handling of COVID-19 stacks up against other countries around the world. And as you can see, only France and Poland in the EU have lower percentages of people with a positive sentiment towards the government's handling of COVID-19 than the US. A general trend here is that where governments were very quick to act with very strict measures, the approval ratings of government handling suggest there is now appreciation for the government's approach. So even if at the time where the restrictive measures were put in place, they might have sort of been, they were quite unpopular at the time, but now that is clearly paying off for those countries who were very quick in putting very restrictive measures in place. Moving on, we look at the percentage of people who think the situation is getting worse in their own country. And just as we saw a drop in percentage of people who think the situation in the country is getting better, here we see an increase from last wave to this latest wave in percentage of people who think the situation in the country is getting worse. So this is in many cases due to the outbreaks that have happened in many countries, these hotspots with a huge number of cases, which makes people feel that it is getting worse. So we see particular significant increases in Norway and Germany. And let's just look at Norway first here. So the increase is somewhat down to lovely summer weather actually in Norway, which has resulted in the regions forgetting a bit about social distancing. And we've seen images of partying, young, just generally partying people in Oslo and crowded beaches. And these are some of the things that have led to an increase in cases in Norway, which is why we're seeing this increase in percentage of Norwegians that think the situation is actually getting worse in the country. Also for Germany, as you can see here, we see a significant jump in percentage of people who think the situation is getting worse. And we've taken the opportunity to take a deep dive into the German figures to look at the profile of people who feel that it is getting worse, and compare them to the people that feel it's getting better. So starting on the right-hand side here in green, looking at the German people who feel that the situation is getting worse, they are more often older, so 51 years or older, and more often live in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is where we had that recent severe outbreak in the slaughterhouse. And they tend to have a lower income and distrust banks more often than people who think that the situation is getting better. And then looking at the left-hand side here, the purple colored profile, we have a higher percentage of younger people. These are the people who think the situation is getting better. We are seeing that they are more often interested in watching World Cup Live and science shows on TV, and they are more frequently eating in restaurants and supporters of Doctors Without Borders. So really important to understand these nuances when you are looking to communicate with any of these segments, of course. This next slide provides a great overview of what people worry about as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. And here we're looking at the people who are saying that they are very or fairly worried about different statements. So as you can see, the Spanish people, the blue line to the far right here on the chart, worries the most about all aspects from friends, family, or themselves becoming unwell or die from COVID to negative impact on the household and personal financial situation, and they worry about children's education being negatively impacted. On the other end of the scale, so to the left-hand side here, the Danes, Norwegians, and the Finns worry the least. The Swedes, interesting here because they do follow the Nordic countries when it comes to impact on job security and their personal financial situation and impact on children's education. But they're much more worried than the rest of the Nordic countries when it comes to becoming seriously unwell or dying from COVID, or friends or family becoming unwell or dying from COVID. So this is no doubt down to the different strategy applied by the Swedish government, which has resulted in much higher death toll than in the other Nordic countries. And it is important to pay attention to the mood in the different countries, whether you are communicating to your customers in a given country or indeed also communicating to your staff in an organization in a given country. So be mindful of this. Now, changing gear a little bit, we look at the data from the economic recovery module, and this first slide here basically provides a great indication that the general population across all countries in Europe are expecting less negative impact on business activity than where we were early May. So as you can see, we have declining trend lines across all countries in terms of percentage of people saying that the level of business activity has decreased compared to 1 month ago. And we're seeing it dropping between 10 to 20 percentage points. So this is quite significant. So this should indeed help with the optimism. And actually we see the same trend on the next slide, where it's a little bit less extreme drops than we saw on the previous slide. But on this slide, we're looking at the percentage of people saying that their household financial situation will be getting worse 12 months from now. And here we're also seeing declining trends from early May to now. So less people saying that their financial situation will be worse 12 months from now. And where we saw drops sort of between 10-20 percentage points in the previous slide, here we're seeing declines between 3 and 7 percentage points, but indeed still a positive trend here. Now, looking at job security, we see that it is particularly Italy, Spain, and the UK that are worried about job losses because of the current situation. So as you can see, women, particularly in Italy, are very concerned about losing their job. But also in Spain and the UK, women worry more than men about losing their job. However, it's actually only in France and in Norway that women worry less than men about losing their job. Interesting and tempting to comment further on this, but I will resist that temptation and move straight into sort of looking at how the reopening strategies impact consumer behavior. And the first slide we want to look at here, we're actually just diving into France, as the picture is sort of similar for most countries. So we're just taking the example of France here. And what we generally see is that as restrictions are eased, our overall spend in physical stores increases. Now, as evident here, with the example again from France, we are now starting spending on other things than groceries. So clothing, for instance, as we are slowly but surely starting to engage with the outside world again, socializing a bit more. So it's time to renew the wardrobe a bit. And we actually see the same positive impact on our online spend. If you look at the next slide, so again, we're using France as an example here, but of course, the same data is available for all countries. And we can see that our overall spend is increasing, and the increase is coming from, for instance, from spend on clothing. The continuous increase on online spend, despite the fact that most are now able to shop, of course, in physical stores, would also indicate that we are generally quite happy to continue some of the online shopping behaviors that we've taken on board during COVID. So that is also important to keep paying attention to. Now, let's look at our behavior as it relates to vacation and using cash, supporting local businesses, buying more green, sustainable products, and making more use of online shopping and delivery. So the number one change in our behavior that will have a significant impact in the near and medium-term future is the clear intention by the majority across all countries to support local businesses much more. And we've recorded this picture throughout the COVID crisis, and this is definitely a trend to carefully consider in your communication and your general approach to markets. And using less cash in the future is also a clear intention from the majority in both Spain and the UK, but also quite high for all other countries. And given that we are all thinking about summer vacation in Europe right now, it is of course also interesting to look at the top statement on this chart. So I can't wait to go on vacation overseas. And as you can see, the Swedes stand out massively here. So with 53% saying that they can't wait to go on vacation overseas. They're closely followed by the Brits and the Norwegians. But what is, of course, interesting to look at in this context is whether we actually want to go overseas or whether we are looking forward to a vacation in our own country. So the next slide actually dives a bit further into our holiday plans. So let's just take a look at Sweden, and you will find Sweden the second last country on the chart here. And you can see that the Swedes are generally just looking very much forward to going on vacation, so overseas as well as in their own country. Italy, around the middle of the chart here, stands out with 62% saying that they can't wait to go on vacation in their own country. And the picture is similar for both Spain and France, that are clearly looking forward to vacationing in their own countries. The Germans are less excited about going on vacation in their own country, where more people are looking forward to going overseas. But let's just take a moment to look at the profile of the people in Italy who can't wait to go on vacation in their own country. So these people are more often older than 50. They tend to own the house or the flats they live in, and they are generally more passionate about traveling than the general population. They also tend to spend more money when they do travel. And they can also see, and here you can also see sort of to the right-hand side, which brands they like and which parameters that are important for them when choosing a hotel, for instance. So now you know how the audience that you need to reach and communicate to look like. If you'd like to connect with the Italians that are planning to enjoy their vacation in Italy this year. And of course, we'd be able to look at this type of data for all countries. And I feel that on that summer vacation note, I'll take the opportunity to wish you all a lovely summer holiday, whether you are planning to stay in your own country or go overseas. And with that, Will, I will hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bianca. That's absolutely fascinating. What I think is particularly encouraging for the economy is people seeing an increase in business activity. I'm going to come back to you at some point, maybe not today on this call, to understand your interpretation of the differences in genders of worrying about jobs by markets. But I think also that just on travel plans, really interesting to look at internal versus external holiday wishes. which actually sort of dovetails very nicely into a new tool that YouGov's releasing in the near future called Destination Index, which is very similar to Brand Index, but just rather than looking at brands, it's looking at holiday destinations, be those countries or cities, which has been just been released actually. So that's that would be interesting to watch and maybe bring some of that data into these types of discussions in future. Right, let me talk a little bit about future developments, but before I do, I can see there have been a number of questions coming in. Please do keep them coming. We really do want to hear them. But while Bianca is able to read through some of those questions and can think of some answers, I'm going to talk just a little bit about where we're going next and what we're doing with our COVID trackers. So on the last wave of our COVID-19 Block 2 trackers has been completed and will be published later this week. When I say Block 2, we've been running these trackers in blocks of 8 weeks. The reason that we've been doing that is, one, to make sure that we can change the survey every 8 weeks, to make sure that it is best fit for purpose in the given the current situation. We're also, of course, not sure how long the pandemic is going to last, or how long the appetite of clients is to receive this type of data. So we're starting Block 3 next week. There will be changes to the questionnaire. What we're looking at is bringing together a lot of the consumer monitor and our economic recovery data into one single survey. But of course, we're always looking for client feedback. So if there are questions that you think that we are missing, please do let us know, and we will try and accommodate that. What we're also doing is actually reducing the number of markets that we cover. So if you are very keen on keeping a particular market going, then do let us know, and again, we will try our best to accommodate. Any feedback that you have, please get in touch with your local office, or you can email us info@yougov.com. Right, over to the first of the questions, and I can see that there's been a couple coming in. The first one was from Stefan. Are there any differences inside Europe? Hopefully, I think Bianca has given a great tour of the European data, showing key differences where they exist, for example, on travel plans, on trust in government. But if there is a particular question that you're interested in, looking at the breakdown by the constituent countries of Europe, then please do let us know, and we can delve into them. Bianca, what have you found in the questions?
So there is an interesting question, of course, about whether the media is playing a role in the perception of getting worse or better. And absolutely, I think that is key. I do find that there are certain areas that we can see when we talk, for instance, about whether people worry that their house prices or equity sort of is impacted by the crisis. The answers to that is impacted massively by how much the media sort of covers that, for instance, and just in general, right? That has a huge impact. So
I'd just like to build on that, if I may, Bianca, because we see this not only in Europe but around the world. And depending on people's main news source, you can absolutely cut the population by those that are getting perceive the situation to be getting better or worse. Take an example. Those people who watch Fox News in the US far more likely to say that the situation is getting better in the US compared to those who watch maybe something like CNN or MSNBC. It's a common theme around the world, depending on the political leaning and the support for government that a particular media outlet has, and that is proven out in our data.
No, it's a great extra comment there, Will. And a question, Will, that I think I want to pose to you, because I know that you've been looking into that. So do we know anything about people's perception and attitudes towards another potential lockdown in case of a COVID wave 2 in Europe?
Yes, we do. So we've asked a number of questions specifically in the UK. Let's try and bring this closer to Europe than the US. Looking at support for not only for government measures of easing of lockdown, but also looking at people's perceptions of what happens if there is a significant second wave. Now, the UK Prime Minister announced earlier last week that from the 4th of July, pubs, hairdressers, restaurants, and non-essential shops would be able to open. As you can imagine, the Brits are itching to get to the pub in the main. But what we have seen is that there has been very significant fluctuations in support of the easing of lockdown measures, depending on geography. So depending on if there have been local flare-ups, but also as media stories have emerged of second spikes potentially around the world. Not only that, what I think is the really interesting piece is if we look at whether people would support or oppose a second lockdown if there was a second peak. What we have seen in the UK data is that 75% of the population would support a second lockdown if it were required. But more interestingly, if you break down that 75%, 43% of the entire population would support a stricter lockdown than that we have had previously. And I think what they're looking at, and linking this back to the data that Bianca showed earlier, in terms of looking at that league table of government approval ratings, where we saw places like Australia towards the top, and the UK, France, and the USA towards the bottom. And you know, the reasons that those, or that we believe that those rankings exist, is that the population is very keen for governments to act swiftly and decisively in relation to this, to stamp out the virus, rather than take more half-hearted measures that might prolong some form of lockdown. So I think those are two very interesting data points just on that one, Bianca.
Yeah, perfect. Very interesting. And I do like, there's a comment here that I just thought would share. You know, consider the Swedes are not allowed to enter more countries than the rest. Perhaps that also increases the longing to travel. And that is, of course, always, it's a good comment, because, of course, there are many countries that have sort of said, due to the situation in Sweden, they're actually not allowed to travel so many places. But I think the Swedes in general are big travelers, and we could see it that there were as many people who were looking to just go on vacation in general, whether it was in their own country or overseas, right?
Yeah. Bianca, I've got a question for you. Looking at all of this data and getting out your crystal ball, what could you see as sort of one of the singular or maybe a handful of themes that we can see showing from our data looking at the future?
No, it's a good question, actually, and I think definitely sort of impacted by the data that we have shared today. Will, I think the crisis has put the spotlight on some key social issues, actually, and some challenges. So the recent outbreaks in Europe has definitely sort of zoomed in on actually some quite unacceptable working conditions for immigrants, for seasonal workers around Europe. We're also seeing, which I also think has a big impact and something to really watch out for, is that throughout this tracking period, we've seen that people continuously say that they intend to support local businesses much more. And I think this is a trend that will stay, and it's something that really, both in the sort of near term and medium term, for sure, is something for all of you to pay attention to. And I think thirdly, there is this changing behavior. Now, we weren't covering it so much today, but we're seeing in the data. So changing behavior and attitudes towards working from home, which of course impacts transportation needs and the way that we do transport ourselves, or indeed also do not transport ourselves because we're working from home. And those are all sort of critical and even to some degree structural changes that will remain and will last way beyond the crisis. So these are things to really, really pay attention to, I think, as we sort of move into reopening and things are starting to be more positive. There are things that will continuously be sort of different than before Corona.
Fantastic. Bianca, thank you very much. We're at 45 minutes. I think we've come to the end of our questions. So I'm going to wrap up here. If anyone does have any further questions or would like to get in contact with us, our general email address is info@yougov.com, or please do get in touch with your local country office. Just to say a few thank yous, a massive thank you to the YouGov marketing team for support in producing today. Of course, a huge thank you to Bianca and her team, but most of all, a massive thank you to you, our clients and our audience, for attending and for your engagement. So it's a goodbye from me. It's a goodbye from Bianca.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Have a lovely summer, everyone.
And I hope you have a wonderful day. Many thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.